The jungle was dense and unforgiving, its floor soaked in monsoon rain, its air thick with sweat, rot, and war. In the heart of the Burmese campaign, Allied forces struggled to push back the Japanese army through impossible terrain. Along winding trails and muddy slopes, a column of soldiers moved slowly, burdened not only by weapons and hunger, but by something entirely unexpected: an elephant, massive, silent, and resolute. The creature walked alongside them like a ghost from another world. He had no voice in the war, no uniform, no orders to follow, but his presence was undeniable. His name would come later. For now, he was just the elephant, a living machine captured from the enemy. The Japanese had used him to haul artillery across the jungle, but when their position collapsed, he was left behind, abandoned among wreckage and death. The Chinese expeditionary force found him standing quietly beside a ruined cart, his dark eyes blinking through flies and gun smoke. No one knew exactly what to do with him. He was enormous, powerful, yet eerily calm. A Chinese officer named Lieutenant Xie took the lead, offering him a piece of The elephant accepted it with slow dignity. The troops, exhausted and hungry themselves, looked on with a mix of awe and disbelief. But something shifted in that moment. In the middle of the jungle, surrounded by chaos, this animal, once a tool of war, had become something else entirely. A companion. Over the weeks that followed, the elephant, now affectionately called Ame, began to carry more than just supplies. He bore the emotional weight of the men around him, soldiers exiled from their homes, cut off from their families, fighting a brutal campaign in near silence. At night, some would sit near him, resting their backs against his thick legs, telling stories into the humid dark. He listened without judgment, without question. He simply stayed. The soldiers soon gave him a new name: Lin Wang, Forest King. It fit. He was more than a beast of burden. He had become a steady symbol of strength. Unlike trucks, he didn't break down in mud. Unlike men, he never complained. He moved forward through gunfire, storm, and despair. A silent reminder that even in war, dignity could survive. Lin Wang never roared, never resisted. He simply walked. But war has no patience for peace. And Lin Wang's journey was far from over. Ahead lay rivers swollen with death, cliffs blasted by artillery, and a trail soaked in blood. The men would need him, not just for his strength, but for something deeper. They ihust. They'd no idjed. The jungle offered no silence, only a constant, low hum of insects, the occasional crack of distant gunfire, and the tired shuffling of boots through wet soil. But within that noise, Lin Wang moved quietly. He didn't resist when men tied ropes to his back or loaded crates of ammunition onto him. He didn't flinch at the smell of smoke or the metallic scent of blood. He was no longer wild. And yet, he was not entirely tamed either. He was, like the soldiers around him, stuck in a space between survival and servitude. Lin Wang had once belonged to the enemy, part of a Japanese logistics division that used elephants for transport. When their lines collapsed, they abandoned the animals, just as they abandoned many of their wounded. Lin Wang was one of the lucky ones, rescued or captured, depending on the angle of history. Now, he was serving a new master: the Chinese First Army, marching alongside British and American units through the mud-choked killing fields of Burma. Some of the soldiers saw him as a tool, nothing more. To them, he was just muscles stronger than 10 men, useful for carrying artillery shells and heavy equipment up hills that even mules couldn't climb. But others saw something different. When he looked at them with his deep, amber eyes, there was no wildness, just a strange calm, as if he understood their exhaustion. Maybe he did. Maybe the war had aged him too. Food was scarce. Water was contaminated. Men died from disease as often as from bullets. And yet, Lin Wang walked. He carried crates, hauled carts, and once, during a downpour, dragged a truck stuck in the mud for 3 hours without rest. The soldiers began to speak to him like a comrade, not out of madness, but out of need. In a war where everyone screamed orders or cried out in pain, Lin Wang was the only presence that simply listened. One night, As they camped near the Irrawaddy River, a young soldier collapsed from fever. Delirious, he began crying out in his native dialect, reaching blindly into the dark. Lin Wang stepped forward and gently touched the man's shoulder with his trunk. Whether it was curiosity or compassion, no one could say, but the soldier calmed. He slept through the night. That small gesture spread through the camp like a whispered miracle. From then on, many of the men no longer saw Lin Wang as a prisoner. They saw him as one of them. But war does not pause for sentiment. Orders came down. The division would move east. At dawn, toward a region the maps marked in red. Japanese resistance was expected to be heavy. Lin Wang would go with them, loaded once again with ammunition and rations. No one asked if he was willing. No one ever had, yet the elephant stepped forward into the darkness, just as he always did, not as a prisoner, but as a silent soldier of a war he never chose. Path swallowed by thick bamboo and soaked in monsoon rains. Itad no Nemba, the soldiers who walked it would never forget it. The mission was clear. Move supplies through Japanese-held territory to support Allied positions near La Sierra. What wasn't clear was how many would survive the journey. And yet, at the front of the convoy, Lin Wang walked without hesitation. The terrain punished every step. Mud turned into quicksand, jungle vines sliced like razors, soldiers slipped, packs tore, and tempers flared. Trucks bogged down within hours. Even mules collapsed from exhaustion. But Lin Wang pushed forward, dragging carts and crates on terrain that broke steel and bone. At one point, a collapsing bridge threatened to stall the entire column. Lin Wang, guided only by rope and shouted commands, pulled a half-loaded wagon across the fractured structure, inch by inch, as bullets cracked in the distance. Some began calling him the spirit of the march. It wasn't superstition, it was survival. When the men faltered, they looked to the elephant. When their bodies screamed for rest, they listened for his steady steps in the mud. He was more than an animal. He was movement, momentum, refusal. No one could explain it fully, but everyone felt it. As long as Lin Wang walked, there was still hope of making it out alive. But freedom, in war, is never just physical. For many of these men, Chinese soldiers fighting far from home, often for a cause dictated by foreign commanders, the war had already taken everything. Families, farms, names. Some didn't even carry photographs anymore. And yet, beside them walked a creature with no nation, no flag, and no hate in his heart. Lin Wang belonged to no one, and perhaps that made him the most free among them. One afternoon, during a rare rest, a British officer approached the Chinese unit. He offered them a small crate of canned peaches. A gesture of alliance. The officer paused when he saw Lin Wang bathing in the river, gently spraying water over two younger soldiers. "That animal," he said quietly, "doesn't realize he's in the middle of hell." A Chinese sergeant replied, "That's why he survives it." The two men stood in silence, watching the elephant splash in the golden light. But even in that moment of calm, the war crept closer. Scouts reported enemy movement along the hills to the north. The convoy would have to move again fast and under cover of darkness. The soldiers gathered their gear. Lin Wang knelt to receive another load. No commands were needed. He stood when they stood. He walked when they walked. On a trail toward blood and fire, a silent elephant led men who had already lost everything and still chose to keep walking. The deeper the convoy pushed into Burma's jungle-covered interior, the quieter the world became. Gunfire faded behind distant ridges. But the silence that followed was not peace. It was anticipation. Every rustle in the trees carried weight. Every snapped branch sounded like a rifle. The soldiers no longer spoke unless necessary. They moved in whispers and gestures. And through it all, Lin Wang remained calm, an enormous presence in a land that didn't belong to him, yet somehow welcomed him. For the elephant, there was no map, no strategy. He followed the same instincts that had guided his ancestors for centuries. Rhythm, memory, repetition. He learned the shape of the land faster than most scouts. He knew when a path would be too steep, when mud was deeper than it looked. The soldiers began to trust his pauses more than their own compasses. When Lin Wang stopped, so did they. When a tournée était, no one called it leadership, but that's what it was. What amazed the men most wasn't his strength, but his stillness. When soldiers broke down, some sobbing from fever, others cursing in hopelessness, Lin Wang would sometimes approach slowly and lower his head, resting it near them without touching. He didn't move until they did. His silence wasn't empty. It was presence. In a place where everything was either too loud or too deadly, Lin Wang's quiet was a form of healing. No orders, no judgment, just presence. The land around them, however, had no such mercy. Leeches covered their legs. Monsoon rains destroyed their boots. Jungle rot ate at their skin. One night, a soldier woke up screaming, not from a dream, but from discovering a snake coiled in his blanket. The men laughed, for the first time in days, not because it was funny, but because it broke the weight of silence. In the following days, enemy patrols grew closer. At one point, the unit was forced to halt for 20 hours in total stillness to avoid detection. No fires, no talking, just waiting in the dark, soaked and shivering. One of the youngest soldiers, barely 16, curled up beside Lin Wang's massive leg, using his side as a wall against the cold. The elephant didn't move. He simply breathed, slow and steady, a silent metronome in a war of chaos. By now, even the most hardened officers had stopped seeing Lin Wang as cargo. He was their barometer, their compass, their quietest ally. The weight on Lin Wang's back would grow heavier, but so would the one in his heart. The enemy didn't always come in uniform. It didn't always carry a rifle or shout in Japanese. Sometimes it came as a slow, creeping enemy beneath the feet mud. Thick, relentless, swallowing boots, wagons, and sometimes even hope. As the 1st Chinese Division advanced toward a new staging area near the Salween River, the ground began to collapse beneath them. Monsoon rains turned the paths into rivers. Wheels spun helplessly. Mules slipped and broke their legs. Every mile became a battle. His weight, once an advantage, now made each step dangerous. His legs sank deep, and it took entire squads to help him pull free. But he never panicked. He never stopped. The men watched in awe as he braced himself, shifted his weight, and pushed forward again, not with rage or fear, but with resolve. When others faltered, he became the example, not by command, but by instinct. He was, once again, the spirit of movement. That night, the camp was quiet. Fires were forbidden due to the proximity of enemy patrols. The soldiers ate cold rations and tried to dry their soaked uniforms with body heat. But Lin Wang stood near the edge of camp, swaying slowly under the weight of a canvas-covered crate. He refused to lay down until someone came to unload it, not because he was ordered to, but because he knew the weight didn't belong to him. Only when the last box was removed did he sink into the mud to rest. But fire came the next morning, and not from the sky. A sudden mortar strike, launched from hidden Japanese positions in the nearby hills, caught the column off guard. Shells rained down in thunderous blasts. Soldiers scrambled for cover. One truck exploded into flames. The jungle became a nightmare of smoke and shrapnel. And amid it all, Lin Wang rose. A direct hit had shattered a nearby cart, and debris had struck his side. Blood mixed with mud on his flank. Instead, he moved toward the surviving crates, still loaded with ammunition and water. Ignoring the smoke, ignoring the burning sting in his leg, he bent down, wrapped his trunk around a crate, and dragged it toward the others. The men saw it, and something in them They surged forward, forming a makeshift line to save the rest of the supplies. The elephant had acted before the officers. Before the orders, because something inside him understood the urgency. Later, when the fire had died and the silence returned, a young medic approached Lin Wang. The wound was deep, but not fatal. As he cleaned the blood and applied a makeshift bandage, the elephant didn't resist. He just watched the soldier with tired eyes. In that gaze was more than pain. There was memory. As of Lin Wang too remembered every roar, every collapse, every loss. And still, he stood, because he had learned like the men around him, that in war, survival was its own form of resistance. The jungle canopy had always offered a false sense of protection. Dense, tangled, and dark, it shielded the soldiers from enemy eyes, but not from enemy fire. As the 1st Chinese Division regrouped after the mortar ambush, they received orders to prepare for an airstrike zone near the Salween River crossing. Japanese reconnaissance planes had already been spotted. The men moved with urgency, shifting crates, digging defensive trenches, and camouflaging gear. But the sky didn't wait. It came at noon. The first hum was faint, like a mosquito in the distance. Then a swarm of engines roared overhead. The jungle lit up with explosions. Trees shattered like matchsticks. Ground convulsed. Men dove into shallow pits, clutching helmets, praying the bombs would miss. In the chaos, Lin Wang stood frozen for a moment, not from fear, but from focus. The earth trembled beneath his feet, but he didn't bolt. His eyes scanned the fire and falling branches, and then, calmly, he moved. A wagon of medical supplies had overturned in the blast. Flames licked the sides of crates, still intact. A wounded soldier crawled toward them, shouting for help. "Unable, to walk." Lin Wang charged forward, not recklessly, but with terrifying precision. He used his trunk to yank burning debris away, knocking aside branches and dragging crates to safety. Behind him, the wounded soldier sobbed as others pulled him to shelter. No one could explain it. The elephant had acted faster than anyone. He didn't follow orders. He just knew. After the bombing ended, the jungle was unrecognizable. Smoke hung low like a funeral shroud. The air was thick with ash and the smell of scorched earth. Dozens of men were injured. Some didn't survive, but in the middle of the devastation stood Lin Wang. His ears singed, his body streaked with soot. A young lieutenant approached him slowly, unsure whether to thank him or mourn. But Lin Wang simply lowered his head and waited. Not for praise, but for purpose. That night, the mood was unlike any before. There was no singing, no conversation. It was quiet. One soldier carved a small wooden figure of Lin Wang and placed it near the sleeping area. Others followed, adding bits of cloth, spare buttons, even a cigarette, a strange little shrine to the creature who had carried more than just supplies through the flames. Some men wept quietly, not because of the horror, they had long grown used to that, but because Lin Wang reminded them that something good, something brave, still existed in the fire. The next morning, the order came. Move out at dawn. The division was to continue toward the next ridge, where a new outpost needed reinforcement. Lin Wang was bandaged, sore, and slower, but he stood, as he always did. The path ahead was steep, and the rain had returned. Still, the elephant walked forward. No one said a word. They just followed him, because now they no longer saw him as part of the war. They saw him as the reason they could survive it. Colonel Yu had seen enough of war to know that men often broke before their bodies did. He watched his soldiers closely, not just their wounds, but their silence, their stares, the way they carried their rifles. It was late 1944, and the Burma campaign had already swallowed thousands. Yet, somehow, his division was still moving forward. And at the heart of that slow march was a creature no military manual had ever prepared him for. Lin Wang, the elephant who marched without fear, without rest, without complaint. Lu had first dismissed Lin Wang as a novelty left over from a captured Japanese supply unit. But reports kept reaching his desk. An elephant pulling wrecked vehicles. An elephant calming wounded soldiers. An elephant that refused to eat until his cargo was unloaded. At first, Liu suspected exaggeration. Soldiers in war clung to symbols, but then he saw it himself. During a mudslide evacuation, Lin Wang had braced his massive frame to stop a supply cart from toppling off a ridge. No command. No panic. Just action. Intrigued, Liu requested that the elephant be brought forward for observation. He stood in silence as Lin Wang arrived, flanked by two handlers. The animal was scarred, weary, but steady. Liu approached slowly, expecting a beast. What he found was presence. Lin Wang met his gaze, unflinching. In that moment, the colonel understood why his men followed the elephant with such reverence. He wasn't just an asset. He was something more primal, a creature of order in a world of chaos. Later that evening, Liu sat by the fire with two junior officers. One of them, a medic, told him about the time Lin Wang had shielded fallen crates from fire during a bombing run. Another recalled a night when the elephant had wrapped his trunk around a crying soldier's shoulders and refused to leave. "He listens," the medic said. "He sees things we miss." Louis said nothing, but in his notebook, he wrote one line: "The elephant does not speak, but he is heard." The next day, Liu issued a rare directive. Lin Wang was to be treated not as a tool of war, but as part of the unit. He would receive rations, rest, and medical care equal to that of any soldier. There was no ceremony, no headlines, but among the men, the effect was immediate. Morale rose. Tension eased. Some even began calling him Sergeant Lin as a joke, but the respect was real. For once, the war had given them something they didn't have to bury. Still, the road ahead was cruel. Intelligence confirmed that a heavily fortified Japanese line awaited them beyond the next river. Supplies were running low. Reinforcements were uncertain. But Colonel Liu felt something shift in his heart. For all the strategies and orders he'd given, none had inspired his men like the silent strength of that elephant. As the unit prepared to move, Louis approached Lin Wang one more time. He didn't salute. He didn't speak. He just stood beside him and listened. The river looked calm from a distance, but every soldier knew what waited beyond it. The Japanese had fortified the opposite bank with hidden machine gun nests, artillery, and barbed wire. It was a death trap, yet it was the only path forward. The 1st Chinese Division had orders to cross at first light. As the soldiers prepared for the assault, silence settled over the camp. It was empty fear that gripped them now. It was the weight of knowing this could be the last march for many of them. And in the center of it all, Lin Wang stood waiting. He was loaded with medical supplies, extra ammunition, and a canvas-covered crate of field radios. The gear was heavy, and his wounds from earlier battles hadn't fully healed. But he didn't protest. He lowered his body for loading, then rose with slow determination. The men around him tightened straps and checked harnesses, some whispering prayers into the damp morning air. Lin Wang remained still. If he was aware of the danger ahead, Agabe, no sign, but in his stillness, there was a kind of bravery none of the men could imitate. At dawn, the attack began. Allied artillery opened fire, shaking the jungle with deafening thunder. Under cover of smoke and chaos, the soldiers began crossing the river in small boats and on foot. Lin Wang waded in slowly, water rising past his knees, then his chest. His handlers clung to his sides, using his bulk for cover. Bullets zipped overhead. One struck a crate on his back, splintering the wood, but Lin Wang didn't flinch. It kept moving step by deliberate step, through the water and into fire. Halfway across, a boat overturned. 2 soldiers disappeared under the current. Without hesitation, Lin Wang turned, swinging his trunk into the water, searching blindly. One of the men surfaced, gasping. Reaching, Lin Wang caught him by the collar and lifted him onto his back. The other was pulled to safety by the handlers. The crossing could have collapsed into chaos spots somehow. Lin Wang's calm held the men together. His presence in the river became the rallying point in the storm. When they reached the far bank, the real fight began. Machine gun fire ripped through the underbrush. Soldiers scattered, returning fire as mortar rained down. Amid the fury, Lin Wang trudged forward, delivering the supplies to the temporary command post. A shell landed close, knocking him to the ground. For a moment, he didn't move. The men rushed to him, hearts pounding but slowly. He stood again, bruised, bloodied, but unbroken. Cheers erupted, not loud, but full of awe. The elephant had survived. Again, that night, after the ridge was secured, Colonel Liu visited Lin Wang. The elephant was lying down, breathing heavily, his side bandaged. Liu sat beside him, resting a hand on his thick skin. He said nothing. No words felt appropriate. Around them, the jungle still smoked, and the wounded cried softly into the night. But Lin Wang had crossed through fire and brought others with him. The men had survived, not just because they fought, but because something ancient, quiet, and loyal had refused to fall. The guns eventually quieted, but the memories never did. After the successful crossing and the hard-won ground on the far bank of the Salween River, the 1st Chinese Division was finally ordered to withdraw and regroup. The Japanese had been pushed back for now, but the cost had been heavy. Tents were filled with wounded, and the air was thick with the smell of blood and smoke. Amid the haze, Lin Wang stood silently beside the medical station at his side, still bandaged, his body trembling with fatigue, but his eyes calm. Soldiers approached him now not as a curiosity, but as a brother. Others gently touched his leg in passing. It wasn't ceremony, it was gratitude. Lin Wang had carried ammunition, pulled vehicles, shielded soldiers, and even saved men from drowning. Yet there would be no medals pinned to his side, no official citations in headquarters. He wasn't listed on any victory report. But the men knew. They remembered. And in war, memory was sometimes the only justice left. A visiting American officer, observing the camp, asked Colonel Liu who the elephant belonged to. Liu paused before answering, "To no one, and to all of us." The officer laughed, thinking it a joke, but Liu wasn't joking. Lin Wang didn't wear a uniform. He followed no rank, but he had done what few men could. He had endured, without orders, without complained, without asking why. That kind of loyalty couldn't be trained. It had to be earned and shared. As weeks passed and the campaign wound down, the soldiers prepared for redeployment. Lin Wang, no longer fit for heavy loads, was assigned light duties carrying food, water, and messages between camps. But even in this quieter role, his presence meant everything. New recruits, who had only heard stories, stared in disbelief when they saw him. "Is that him?" they would whisper, and the veterans would nod. "That's Lin Wang. He was there when the jungle burned." But perhaps the most remarkable thing about Lin Wang was that he never changed. He didn't seek attention. He didn't react to applause. He walked when they walked. He waited when they waited. The war had taken fathers, sons, and brothers from the men around him. And yet, somehow, this elephant had given something back, a sense of steadiness, of survival, of silent strength. He was a reminder that not all heroes march on two legs, and not all courage needs words. When the final orders came, the division would return to China, and eventually, Lin Wang would be moved to a new life far from the battlefield. But in that quiet period between war and peace, the men knew they had witnessed something rare. Lin Wang had done more than carry supplies. He had carried their spirit through the worst of it. No medals were necessary, because what he gave them couldn't be worn. It could only be remembered. After the war ended, many stories were lost to silence. Some soldiers returned home with medals. Others never returned at all. But a few stories, passed from voice to voice, outlived the battlefield. Lin Wang's was one of them. He was no longer just an elephant used in war. He had become a memory carried by thousands, a symbol not of victory, but of resilience. And when the army moved him away from the front lines for good, it was as though a chapter had gently closed, leaving behind a quiet echo. In 1947, Lin Wang was transferred from the Chinese military to a public park in Taiwan. What was meant to be temporary housing turned into a lifetime. Children gathered daily to see Grandpa Lin. Parents told stories not made-up fairy tales, but real ones, of how the elephant had marched through fire and carried wounded soldiers across rivers. Veterans visited silently, placing small offerings of fruit, or simply standing in front of his enclosure, remembering everything he had done without ever asking for anything. For decades, Lin Wang became more than a zoo resident. He was a living monument. He connected generations to a war they had never seen. He reminded the world that war was not just fought with bullets and bombs, but with willpower, dignity, and compassion, even from those who could not speak. As he aged, his steps slowed, but his eyes remained the same, deep, calm, and heavy, with the knowledge of everything he had witnessed. When he passed away in 2003 at the estimated age of 86, Taiwan mourned him as a national treasure. He had lived longer than most of the men he had once marched beside. Newspapers ran full-page tributes, schools held moments of silence, and at the Taipei Zoo, where he had spent his final years, thousands came to pay their respects. They didn't cry, just for an elephant. They cried for a companion, a survivor, a quiet soul who had carried more than any creature should have. Today, statues of Lin Wang stand in parks. His name is taught in history lessons.